My name is Margaret Allen, and I never believed betrayal could come from the very child I once carried in my arms. I am 61 years old, a wife, a mother, and until recently, I thought my family, though marked by loss, was still bound by love. 3 days ago, on what should have been an ordinary hike to celebrate our wedding anniversary, my own daughter Vanessa, together with her husband Eric, pushed my husband David and me off a cliff. One moment we were smiling for a photo, the next I was tumbling through the air, the world spinning into jagged rocks below. Broken, bleeding, gasping for breath, I felt David's hand squeeze mine. His whisper cut through the pain, "Don't move, pretend to be dead." But what came after was far worse than the fall itself. Because in that desperate silence, David revealed a secret he had hidden for 20 years. When I look back now, I realize the warning signs were there all along, hiding beneath the ordinary rhythm of our lives. For decades, I believed we had built the kind of family others admired, a family knit together by Sunday dinners, bedtime prayers, and the promise that no matter what storms came, we would endure them side by side. That belief was my anchor. It was also my greatest illusion. We lived in a modest home in Madison, Wisconsin. It wasn't grand, but it was filled with music, laughter, and the smell of fresh bread I loved to bake on weekends. I taught music at the local elementary school, spending my days surrounded by the bright eyes and eager voices of children learning their first notes on recorders and pianos. My husband, David, ran a small clock repair shop downtown, his hands steady and patient, restoring life to heirlooms that ticked away through generations. He often said fixing clocks gave him hope because no matter how broken something appeared, with enough care, it could work again. We had 2 children, and for years, I thought they were the heart of our happiness. Our son Thomas was the older by 5 years, a boy full of laughter and light. From the time he could walk, he was David's shadow in the workshop, curious about gears and springs, always asking how things worked. By the time he reached high school, he was the one neighbors called when a lamp flickered or a lawnmower stopped running. He had a gift, not just with tools but with people. He made friends everywhere he went. Our daughter Vanessa, younger and quieter, grew up in his shadow. She had a sharp mind and an eye for detail, but she also carried a streak of envy that I, in my naivete, dismissed as typical sibling rivalry. While Thomas brought home stories of science projects and glowing praise from his teachers, Vanessa often retreated to her room with a book, slamming the door just enough for me to hear her frustration. I tried to balance my attention, tried to assure her she was just as special, but she rarely believed me. Sundays were our sacred time. After church, we gathered around the oak dining table David had built with his own hands. Thomas would tell stories about his plans for college. He wanted to study mechanical engineering, and Vanessa would poke at her mashed potatoes, answering questions with a shrug or a single word. Sometimes she would look at her brother with a bitterness she didn't bother to hide, but then Thomas would smile at her, ruffle her hair, and somehow dissolve the tension. At least, that's how it appeared on the surface. I remember summer evenings on our porch, fireflies glowing like lanterns in the yard. David and I would sip coffee while the kids chased each other across the grass. I dreamed of their future, soft Thomas designing machines that changed the world, of Vanessa finding her own path, maybe teaching like me, maybe starting a family of her own. I imagined Thanksgiving tables filled with grandchildren, laughter spilling from every corner of the house. It felt simple. It felt safe. But safety, I learned, can be a mask. Behind it, resentments can fester, secrets can grow like weeds, and the people you love most can quietly become strangers. There were small cracks even then. One summer, when Thomas was about 15, he found Vanessa crying on the back porch. She had failed a math test, and though David and I would never have punished her harshly, she sobbed as if the world had ended. Thomas sat beside her, trying to explain equations, his voice gentle, patient. I watched from the kitchen window, proud of him, but when he reached to comfort her, Vanessa jerked her arm away, muttering, "You always think you're better than me." I wanted to intervene, but David stopped me. "Let them figure it out," he said. I nodded, but a chill had settled in my chest. That moment passed, like so many others. We moved forward, smoothing over disagreements, convincing ourselves that time would heal what discipline and affection could not. When Thomas turned 18, he was already making plans for college. Vanessa was 13, sulking more often than smiling, but I clung to the belief she would grow out of it. I told myself she just needed to find her place in the world. If only I had known then what kind of place she would choose. Because in those years, hidden behind her polite smiles at church and her careful manners at family gatherings, Vanessa was already learning how to manipulate, how to twist affection into obligation, and how to wear masks more convincing than any her father ever repaired in his shop. I see it now with a clarity that crushes me. The family I believed was built on love was already crumbling, and the daughter I thought I knew was quietly turning into someone capable of betrayal more horrifying than I could ever imagine. The year Thomas turned 18 remains carved into my memory like a scar that never fades. It was supposed to be a season of hope and celebration, a doorway into his future. He had been accepted into the engineering program at the University of Wisconsin, the first in our family to step onto such a path. I remember how his eyes sparkled when he showed us the acceptance letter, how David's voice cracked with pride as he said, "You're going to do great things, son." For weeks, Thomas talked about moving into the dorms, about joining study groups, about inventing something that would change the way people live. I had never seen him so alive, so full of dreams. Our house buzzed with his excitement, as though his energy spilled into every corner. Vanessa, however, grew quieter. She was 13 then, caught between childhood and the uneasy start of adolescence. While her brother sketched blueprints at the kitchen table, she would sit across from him, chin in her hand, staring at the paper with an expression I couldn't read. Sometimes it was curiosity, but more often, it looked like resentment. I tried to reassure her. "You'll find your own dream too, sweetheart," I told her one evening while folding laundry. "Not everyone has to follow the same path." She shrugged, muttering, "It doesn't matter. You and Dad only care about him." Her words stung, but I brushed them aside. I told myself she didn't mean them, that jealousy was part of being a younger sibling. But that jealousy, I would later learn, was deeper and darker than I imagined. The night Thomas disappeared was cool and crisp, one of those early summer evenings when the air carries both the warmth of the day and the promise of autumn ahead. He had gone to a graduation party thrown by one of his classmates. David and I sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies dance over the lawn, waiting for him to come home. Vanessa stayed in her room, headphones on, music leaking faintly into the hallway. By midnight, Thomas hadn't returned. I tried to be calm, telling myself he was celebrating, that he would be home soon. But by 1 o'clock, my chest tightened with worry. David grabbed his jacket, saying he would drive around town. I called a few parents of his friends, but no one had seen him since the party ended. At dawn, the phone rang. It was the sheriff's office. My knees buckled before I even answered, as though some part of me already knew. They told us Thomas had been found at the bottom of the Black River Gorge, a mile from where the party had been. The official word was that he must have slipped in the dark and fallen. I remember screaming, my voice raw and broken, the sound barely human. David caught me before I collapsed. Vanessa stood in the hallway, pale but eerily composed. She didn't cry, not then, not even at the funeral. She just watched, her face unreadable, as though she were detached from the nightmare unraveling around us. The days that followed were a blur of casseroles left on our porch, whispered condolences, and the hollow echo of Thomas's absence. Our home, once filled with his laughter, felt unbearably silent. I wore my black dress, the same one I had worn at my mother's funeral, and clung to David's arm as though he were the only thing keeping me from crumbling into dust. I expected Vanessa to cling to me too, to mourn with us, but she didn't. She went to school, did her homework, and moved through life as if nothing had changed. When neighbors asked her how she was holding up, she gave polite answers, her voice steady, her eyes dry. At first, I told myself she was coping in her own way, that children grieve differently. But in the quiet of night, when I heard her laughing softly on the phone with Eric, the boy who would one day become her husband, I felt a coldness seep into me. Why was she laughing when the rest of us were drowning in grief? I asked David if he thought her behavior was strange. He hesitated before answering. "She's young," he said finally. "She doesn't understand death the way we do. Give her time." His words soothed me for the moment, but deep down, unease took root. The funeral was the darkest day of my life. The church was filled with people who had known Thomas, teachers, classmates, neighbors. Stories poured out about his kindness, his humor, his promise. Each word was both a comfort and a knife to my heart. I sobbed until my throat ached, clutching David's hand as though it could keep me from drowning. But Vanessa sat still, her hands folded neatly in her lap, her expression calm. When I looked at her, I felt a shiver I couldn't explain. A mother should never feel fear when she looks at her child, but in that moment, something deep inside me stirred a whisper of doubt, a shadow I pushed away as quickly as it came. After the burial, as the last shovelful of dirt fell onto Thomas's coffin, David leaned close and whispered words meant to comfort me. But I would later realize those same words carried a bitterness he couldn't hide. "We'll get through this. Somehow." I believed him. I had to. Because the alternative that my family was unraveling from within was too terrifying to face. What I didn't know then was that David already carried a secret. He had seen something that night, something he chose not to tell me for more than 2 decades. And that secret would return, 20 years later, on the day our daughter tried to finish what she had started. Life after Thomas's death became a series of routines we clung to, like driftwood in a storm. I went back to teaching sooner than I should have, burying myself in the laughter and chatter of my students, hoping their young energy could patch the hole in my heart. David spent more hours in his shop, losing himself in the steady tick of clocks, as if repairing time for others might heal the moment ours had stopped. And Vanessa, my only living child, she carried on as though nothing had happened. At first, I thought it was her way of coping. She studied hard, earned excellent grades, and played the role of the responsible daughter, perfectly. But beneath her tidy notebooks and polite answers, I sensed a hollowness. She rarely mentioned her brother's name, never shed tears for him, never asked about the night he died. If anyone outside the family had looked in, they might have said she was mature for her age, resilient even. But a mother knows better. Still, what choice did I have but to accept the daughter I had left? I told myself Thomas would have wanted me to care for her, to protect her. And I tried. God, how I tried. By the time she turned 16, Vanessa had begun spending more time with a boy from a neighboring town, Eric Walker. At first, he seemed harmless. Polite, with quick jokes and a confident way of speaking. He came from a family that owned a small construction business, and he carried himself with the air of someone destined to succeed. Vanessa lit up when he was around, her usual sulky silence replaced with eagerness and laughter. I wanted to be happy for her. After all the grief we'd endured, maybe she deserved joy. But something about Eric unsettled me. His compliments always sounded rehearsed, his politeness too polished, like a salesman practicing a pitch. He asked questions not about Vanessa's favorite books or dreams for the future, but about our house, our land, and David's business. The first time he came to dinner, he commented on the size of our property. "Must be worth a lot, especially if you ever decided to sell," he said casually, buttering his roll as though the words meant nothing. I laughed nervously, but the way David shifted in his chair told me he didn't like it either. Still, Vanessa was smitten. She talked about Eric constantly, about how ambitious he was, how he wanted to start his own company one day. She insisted he was different from the other boys at school. By the time she graduated, there was no question in her mind they would marry. And they did. Vanessa walked down the aisle in a lace gown, her arm hooked through David's, her eyes shining with triumph more than love. Eric looked at her with pride, but when his gaze slid toward the house we owned, the savings we had tucked away, I saw something colder flicker behind his smile. After the wedding, the visits began. Every Sunday, sometimes twice a week, Vanessa and Eric would come by. At first, I welcomed it. Our home, once so empty after Thomas's death, now buzzed again with voices. Vanessa helped me in the kitchen, Eric chatted with David in the shop. They brought us small gifts, wine, candles, even a set of towels embroidered with our initials. But slowly, their conversations began to shift. "Mom," Vanessa said one afternoon while stirring soup beside me, "have you and Dad thought about updating your will? You're not getting any younger." She laughed lightly, as though it were a joke, but her eyes didn't laugh with her. Eric chimed in later, polishing one of David's tools as if he belonged in the workshop. "It just makes sense to get things in order now. That way, when the time comes, there's no confusion. We'd be happy to help handle the details." The first time, I brushed it off. The second time, I frowned. By the third, a knot of dread had taken root in my stomach. They weren't coming for family dinners anymore. They were circling, probing, calculating. I tried to confide in David, but he waved away my fears. "They're just being practical," he said. "It doesn't mean anything sinister." But as he spoke, I saw a shadow in his eyes, as though he suspected more than he admitted. And so the cycle began, Vanessa's sweet smiles, Eric's rehearsed politeness, questions that dug deeper each time. About the house. About our savings. About insurance policies and retirement plans. On the surface, they were the perfect couple, loving and attentive children who cared for aging parents. But deep down, I knew. Something in my bones told me their love had strings attached. And I was right. Because what began as subtle questions about paperwork would, in time, twist into something darker, something deadly, a betrayal so horrifying it would make the day of Thomas's death look like a prelude to the nightmare still waiting for us. At first, I told myself I was imagining it. Parents are supposed to worry, aren't they? We see shadows where there may be none, we invent storms to protect the children we love. But as weeks turned into months, the shadows around Vanessa and Eric grew too thick to ignore. Their visits became more frequent, but less warm. They no longer came to simply share a meal or spend an afternoon reminiscing about old times. Every conversation carried an undercurrent, a gentle but persistent push toward the same theme: our future, our finances, our property. One Sunday after church, we sat around the oak table David had built decades ago. I had roasted a chicken, the aroma filling the house with what used to be comfort. Vanessa carved herself a piece of meat, then looked up with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mom, Dad," she began, "don't you think it's time to downsize? This house is huge for just two people. You'd be so much more comfortable in a smaller place, maybe a condo in town." Her words fell into the silence like stones dropped into a still pond. I set down my fork. "This house is our home, Vanessa. Every corner holds a memory." Eric, ever the smooth talker, leaned forward, elbows on the table as though he were leading a business meeting. "She's right. Think about Idiori not getting younger. If something happens, this big house will become a burden. Selling now, while the market is high, would give you security and peace of mind. And, of course, we'd help manage everything." I forced a smile, but inside, unease coiled in my stomach. This wasn't about comfort. It was about control. That night, I lay awake staring at the ceiling. David's steady breathing beside me should have calmed me, but it didn't. I whispered into the dark, "They want the house." David stirred, then sighed. "Maybe they're just trying to look out for us." But there was no conviction in his voice. Over the next weeks, their suggestions became more direct. Vanessa asked about our savings accounts, about life insurance policies, about the land my parents had left me. She framed her questions with sweetness, stroking my hand, calling me Mom in that lilting voice, but her eyes glittered with calculation. One afternoon, while folding laundry, she cornered me. "Mom, have you updated your beneficiaries lately? If anything were to happen, you'd want things to be simple for Dad." And for us. The way she said us made my skin crawl. I tried to laugh it off. We're fine, Vanessa. We'll handle things when the time comes. But she didn't laugh. Her smile thinned into a line. Sometimes waiting is the biggest mistake people make. Eric echoed her thoughts during another visit, spreading papers across our kitchen table. He'd drawn up charts comparing different retirement options, as if our lives were a project he was managing. It just makes sense to name us as primary heirs, he said smoothly. We'll handle everything, make sure it's distributed fairly to the grandchildren one day. His tone was logical, convincing, but the implication was chilling. They wanted control now, not later. I confided in my sister, Elaine, over the phone one evening. She listened in silence, then finally said, "Margaret, you need to be careful. Vanessa's interest in your money doesn't sound normal. Watch her. And watch Eric even more." Her warning tightened the knot already twisting inside me. The breaking point came one Friday evening when Vanessa and Eric stayed late after dinner. The dishes were still on the table when Eric cleared his throat. "Mom, Dad," he said, his voice silky but firm, "we think it would be best if you gave us power of attorney over your finances. Just as a precaution. If one of you were to fall ill, we could handle things without legal complications." The audacity of it left me speechless. Vanessa reached across the table, her manicured hand brushing mine. "It's because we love you," she whispered. "We just want to take care of you." But her touch made me shiver. It wasn't love I felt in her fingers. It was ownership. After they left, I confronted David. "Don't you see what they're doing? This isn't about caring for us. It's about control. They want everything." He rubbed his temples, looking older than his years. "I know," he admitted softly. "I've seen the way Eric looks at the house, the land, even the tools in my shop. But what can we do? Vanessa is our daughter." The word daughter hung in the air, heavy and bitter. That night, for the first time in decades, David and I argued. I accused him of being blind, of trusting too easily. He accused me of being paranoid, of letting grief twist my judgment. But beneath our words, I sensed something else, a shadow in his eyes, a weight he carried that I didn't yet understand. And I would soon learn that the secret he had buried for 20 years, the truth about Thomas's death, was the very reason he couldn't bring himself to confront Vanessa now. The house was quiet, but my mind was a storm. After our argument with Vanessa and Eric that evening, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the old clock in the hallway, my body tense as though waiting for a blow that had not yet fallen. Beside me, David turned restlessly. He wasn't sleeping either, I could tell by the way his breath caught, uneven, his shoulders shifting beneath the blanket. Finally, he sat up, swinging his legs over the side of the bed. "David," I whispered, "what's wrong?" For a long moment he didn't answer. He just sat there, head bowed, hands clenched in his lap. Then, in a voice raw with exhaustion, he said words that made my blood run cold. "Margaret, you don't know everything about the night Thomas died." I sat up, my heart pounding. "What do you mean?" "The police said it was an accident." He turned to me slowly, his eyes hollow. "That's what I let them say. That's what I needed to believe. But it wasn't the truth." My breath caught in my throat. For 20 years I had lived with the official story, forcing myself to accept it. To hear him speak so differently, it felt like the ground shifting beneath me. "Tell me," I demanded, though part of me wanted to cover my ears. David buried his face in his hands. "That night, I followed Thomas. He left the house angry, papers clutched in his hand. He'd been digging into our bank records. He found out money was missing. Thousands, Margaret. Gone. Missing?" I whispered, my mind racing. He nodded. He knew it was Vanessa. She'd been taking money from our savings account, giving it to Eric. Back then they were just kids, but she was already lying, already hiding things. Thomas confronted her at the gorge. My chest tightened as if a band were squeezing my ribs. You saw them? I did, he admitted, his voice breaking. I stayed back at first, hoping they'd calm down. But their shouting carried across the night. Thomas accused her of stealing. He said if she didn't confess, he would tell us everything. I pressed my hand to my mouth, horrified. And then? David's eyes glistened in the dim light. She snapped. She screamed that he'd always been the favorite, that he ruined everything for her, that she wouldn't let him destroy what she had with Eric. And then she shoved him. I gasped, the sound sharp in the stillness. He stumbled, David continued, his voice trembling. He reached for something to grab, but there was nothing. I saw him fall, Margaret. I saw our boy tumble into the gorge, his papers fluttering like broken wings. I shook my head, refusing to believe. No. No, she was only 13. She couldn't have. She did, he said firmly, tears streaming down his face. I ran to her. She was shaking, sobbing, saying it was an accident. She begged me not to tell you. She said she didn't mean it, that Thomas lost his balance. I wanted to believe her. God help me, I wanted to. I felt like the air had been punched from my lungs. My daughter, the child I had sworn to protect, had killed her brother. And my husband had carried this secret for 2 decades. Why didn't you tell me? I cried, my voice cracking. David's shoulders sagged under the weight of his guilt. Because I couldn't bear to lose both of them in one night. Thomas was already gone. If I told the truth, Vanessa would have been taken away too. And then what would we have left? Nothing, Margaret. Nothing. I turned away, tears burning my cheeks. You let me believe it was an accident. You let me comfort her, protect her, love her while she. I thought she would change, David whispered. I thought carrying the weight of what happened would make her a better person. I was wrong. Every year since then, I've watched her become colder, more calculating. And now she's after us, just like she was after Thomas. Silence pressed heavy between us. I couldn't speak. My grief for Thomas flared anew, mingled with rage, betrayal, and horror. My husband had chosen to protect the daughter who destroyed our son, and in doing so, he had condemned us all to live under a lie. At last, he reached for my hand, his touch trembling. Margaret, we have to be careful. Vanessa won't stop. She and Eric want everything. And I fear they won't hesitate to finish what she started 20 years ago. I pulled my hand away, not in anger but in devastation. I couldn't bear to feel the weight of his guilt pressed into my skin. That night, I lay awake until dawn, staring at the faint glow creeping into the sky. The truth had finally come out, but it hadn't set me free. It had chained me to a nightmare that was only just beginning. The morning after David's confession, I moved through the house like a ghost. Every photograph of Thomas on the walls seemed to stare back at me with questions I could never answer. My daughter had killed my son, and my husband had buried the truth. And now, 2 decades later, she was circling again, this time with Eric at her side, waiting for the right moment to strike. But it wasn't just waiting anymore. It was planning. 3 days later, the phone rang while I was washing dishes. Vanessa's bright voice spilled through the line, sweet as honey yet sharp as glass. Mom. Dad. Eric and I were talking, and we have the perfect idea for your 40th wedding anniversary. A hike up the Crescent Ridge Trail. You've always wanted to see the view from the top, haven't you? We'll bring a picnic, take pictures. It'll be beautiful. I froze, soapy water dripping from my hands. My chest tightened. A hike. A cliff. My daughter, smiling as she led us toward the very thing she had used to kill her brother. David had overheard. He came into the kitchen, listening with a grim face. When Vanessa finished, he forced his voice into a tone so calm it frightened me. "That sounds lovely, sweetheart. Let us think about it and call you tomorrow." After we hung up, silence filled the room. "She's going to kill us," I whispered. "She wants to push us off that mountain and call it an accident." David nodded, his jaw clenched. "Yes. And if we don't go, she'll find another way. Maybe the stairs. Maybe a car accident. Maybe worse." "So what do we do?" I asked, trembling. He opened the drawer of his desk and pulled out his cell phone. "We prepare. I'll set it to record everything. If we survive, we'll have evidence. If we don't, someone will find it. At least the truth won't die with us." That night, he also handed me a sealed envelope addressed to my sister Elaine. Inside is everything I know. About Thomas. About Vanessa. About tonight's phone call. If we don't come back, she'll know where to find it. I couldn't stop the tears from falling. I clung to him, whispering, "I don't want to die, David." He held me tightly. "Then we fight. We've been silent too long." The drive. Saturday morning dawned with a cruelly beautiful sky, the kind of golden sunrise that should have promised peace. Instead, it felt like mockery. David and I sat at the kitchen table, hardly able to touch our breakfast. When the knock came at the door, my heart nearly stopped. Vanessa stood there radiant, dressed in a sporty jacket and hiking boots, a picnic basket swinging from her arm. Eric loomed behind her with a brand new backpack, bulging with supplies. He grinned. "Ready for adventure?" Adventure. The word curdled in my stomach. The drive to Crescent Ridge took 2 hours, each mile an eternity. Vanessa sang along with the radio, her voice cheerful, while Eric tapped the steering wheel in rhythm. David sat stiffly in the passenger seat, his hand on mine, his thumb brushing the phone hidden in his pocket, already recording. I stared out the window, watching trees blur past, memorizing every detail in case it was the last I would ever see. The trail. The trail began innocently enough, winding through tall pines and wildflowers. Birds sang overhead, and the air smelled of pine sap and earth. To anyone else, it would have felt like paradise. To me, it was a corridor leading straight to hell. Vanessa walked ahead, pointing out flowers and snapping pictures with her new camera. She laughed like a child on Christmas morning. Eric stayed behind us, his eyes always scanning the path as though calculating. "How are you holding up, Mom?" "Dad?" Vanessa asked brightly. "Need to rest?" Her voice was sugar-coated poison. An hour into the hike, the trail grew steeper. My legs ached, and David's breathing grew heavy. They knew this would happen. They wanted us tired, vulnerable, easy to maneuver. I glanced back at Eric. He smiled, but his eyes were flat, predatory. The cliff. Finally, Vanessa stopped. She pointed toward a narrow offshoot trail that snaked upward toward a rocky ledge. "Look at that spot. Perfect for photos. The valley view will be spectacular." The word spectacular chilled me. It was the same word David had used when describing how Thomas must have fallen 20 years ago. I whispered, "David, we can't." He squeezed my hand. "The phone is recording. We have to." The climb up the side path was treacherous. Loose rocks slid under my boots, and more than once I nearly stumbled. Eric reached out as if to steady me, but the look in his eyes told me he would just as easily let me fall. When we reached the top, my breath caught. The view stretched for miles: the valley, the river, the distant haze of the town. Beautiful. Deadly. "Stand right here," Vanessa chirped, positioning us near the edge. "Hold each other, smile. This will be a memory we'll treasure forever." Forever. David wrapped his arm around me, his grip trembling but firm. Vanessa raised her camera. One more step back, she instructed. So the valley's fully in the shot. I felt the empty air yawning behind me, the earth falling away into nothingness. Perfect, she said. Smile. And then her voice dropped, cold and flat, stripped of all pretense. This will be your last photo. Before I could react, Eric lunged. His hands pressed against David's shoulder, shoving hard. Vanessa moved in tandem, her palms slamming into my chest. The world tipped. The ground vanished. I screamed as my body pitched into the void. The fall. The air tore past my face, my ears filled with the roar of wind. David's hand caught mine, his grip desperate. For a split second, time slowed. The image of Thomas's coffin flashed before my eyes, the sound of Vanessa's laughter as a teenager, the feeling of betrayal that burned hotter than the jagged rocks rushing up to meet us. We hit the slope halfway down, rolling, tumbling, bones snapping like brittle twigs. Pain exploded through my body. I couldn't breathe, couldn't scream. My vision blurred. And then David's voice cut through the haze. Weak, ragged, but clear. Don't move, pretend to be dead. I forced my body still, every instinct screaming to cry out. The metallic taste of blood filled my mouth. My heart pounded so loudly I was certain they could hear it. Above us, I heard Vanessa's voice. They're gone. Finally. Eric's laugh followed, dark and triumphant. Now it's ours, all of it. Their words sliced deeper than any broken bone. My daughter, me flesh and blood, had finished what she started 20 years ago. Or so she thought. Because I was still alive. And this time, the truth would not stay buried. The world was spinning, my body screaming in agony. Blood trickled into my eyes, warm and sticky, and every breath felt like a knife. For a terrifying moment, I thought I would lose consciousness. But then David's whisper cut through the ringing in my ears like a lifeline. Don't move, pretend to be dead. So I obeyed. I shut my eyes halfway, slowed my breath, and forced every muscle into stillness. The instinct to moan, to cry out, clawed at me, but I swallowed it down. If I flinched even once, Vanessa and Eric would finish what they had started. I heard them scrambling above, their voices faint but sharp in the clear mountain air. She's not moving, Vanessa said, her voice clipped, practical. Neither of them are. It's done. Eric groaned. Not exactly how we planned it, but close enough. They'll find the bodies and call it a hiking accident. For a moment, silence. Then a laugh, Eric's laugh, low, triumphant, like a man who had finally reached the prize he'd chased for years. They're out of the way, he said. The house, the land, the money, it's all ours now. Each word twisted inside me like a blade. My daughter, the child I had nursed and cradled, had thrown me away like garbage for money. But it didn't stop there. The argument above us. Minutes passed, each one stretched thin as wire. Then Vanessa spoke again, lower, colder. Don't forget, Eric. This wasn't just about money. She never believed in me. It was always Thomas this, Thomas that. Even after he died, I was just the leftover. Now she's gone, and I can finally breathe. Her words sucked the air from my lungs. My body wanted to convulse with grief and rage, but I stayed still, clinging to David's hand in the dirt beside me. Eric chuckled. Well, you certainly proved your point, sweetheart. You're not in anyone's shadow anymore. My stomach churned. The truth was no longer hidden, it was being spoken freely, like a victory chant. And then David whispered so faintly I could barely hear him, now you know. Now you understand what I saw 20 years ago. Even in this nightmare, the weight of his confession pressed down on me. He had seen her push Thomas. And now, she had pushed us. My family had been broken not by fate, but by my daughter's hands. The movement in the gorge. I heard rocks shift nearby. My heart raced. Were they climbing down to check? Don't bother, Vanessa said. The fall was enough. You heard those bones snap. Eric hesitated. Still, what if one of them's alive? Then they'll wish they weren't, she snapped. We'll tell the rescue team they died instantly. No one will question it. Her words dripped with venom. They began moving away, their voices growing fainter as they argued about how to stage their story. I dared to open my eyes just a sliver. The sky was blindingly blue above, the jagged walls of the gorge rising around us like prison bars. A vulture circled high overhead, as if waiting for permission to feast. Beside me, David shifted ever so slightly. His face was gray, blood pooling at his temple. He whispered, I think my ribs are broken. My leg too. Pain radiated through my own body. My right arm was twisted at an unnatural angle, and every breath stabbed like glass. But we were alive. Alive meant we had a chance. Their conversation carried down. As Vanessa and Eric climbed along the upper path, their voices drifted down clearly. We'll say Dad slipped first, Eric rehearsed. Tried to grab Margaret, and they both went over. We tried to help, but the ground gave way under us. Simple. Tragic. Believable. Vanessa scoffed. I've been rehearsing this for years. Do you really think I'd leave it to chance? Eric hesitated, then asked, what if they find something? A letter? Some suspicion? They won't, she said firmly. Dad never had the guts to tell anyone about Thomas. That secret died with him, she cut herself off with a bitter laugh. Well, almost. The blood in my veins turned to ice. She had said it. Out loud. Linking herself to Thomas's death. I closed my eyes tighter, praying the phone in David's pocket had captured every word. The long silence. Eventually, their voices faded. Only the wind filled the gorge, carrying the scent of pine and earth. I dared to whisper. David, do you think they're gone? Not yet, he rasped. They'll circle back. But the phone's still recording. Hold on. We lay there in silence, every minute stretching like a lifetime. My body throbbed with pain, but I forced myself to remain motionless. Somewhere above, I thought I heard the shutter of Vanessa's camera. She was taking pictures. Proof of their perfect day. Proof of our staged accident. Each click of the camera was like a hammer driving a nail into the coffin she had built for us. A flicker of hope. After what felt like hours, David whispered again. They'll call for help. They can't risk not being rescued too. That's when we'll have our chance. His faith steadied me, but only barely. And if no one comes? I asked, my voice trembling. Then at least we tried, he said. At least the truth is out there on this phone. Someone will find it. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to believe our suffering had meaning, that Thomas's death and our fall would not be swallowed in silence. But I also knew my daughter. Vanessa was cunning. Ruthless. And she had already lived half her life hiding one murder. What was another lie to her? Their return. Sometime later, I heard them again. Vanessa's tone was sharp, irritated. My ankles twisted. We need help. Call the rescue team. Eric cursed under his breath, but then I heard the rustle of him pulling out a phone. Don't say too much, Vanessa warned. We're the grieving survivors. Nothing more. The call was brief. Then silence again. David squeezed my hand faintly. We'll make it, Margaret. Just hold on. His words sounded more like prayer than promise. The plan to outlive them. Lying there, broken and bleeding, I realized survival wasn't just about holding on to life. It was about timing. We had to stay silent until the right people arrived. We had to let Vanessa and Eric tell their lies first, let them think they had succeeded. Only then could we rise from the grave they had dug for us and expose them. I whispered back, my lips barely moving, "We'll wait. And when the moment comes, we'll show them the truth." Above us, I heard Vanessa laugh, a brittle, hollow sound that echoed off the gorge walls. Finally, she said, "I'm free." But she was wrong. Because as long as David and I still drew breath, as long as the phone in his pocket still held her words, she wasn't free at all. She was caught in her own web. And soon, the entire world would know it. The sound of voices echoed above us, faint at first, then clearer. Strangers, rescuers. Their shouts bounced against the rock walls of the gorge. "Down here." Vanessa's voice rang out, rehearsed panic laced with false grief. "Please, hurry. My parents, they fell. They're gone." Her performance was flawless. If I hadn't known the truth, I might have believed her. Ropes rattled against stone. Boots scraped as men descended. The air filled with the clink of carabiners and the urgent calls of trained responders. I forced myself to stay limp, breathing shallow, eyes half closed. David did the same. "They're both down," I heard a rescuer say when he reached us. His hands pressed against my neck, searching for a pulse. Faint, but alive. Alive. That word, spoken by someone outside our family, was the sweetest sound I'd ever heard. "Critical condition," another called. "We need a medevac immediately." Above, I could hear Vanessa sobbing. No, they can't be alive, she cut herself off, twisting her words. "I mean, not after that fall, oh God, this is horrible." Her mask was slipping. My heart surged with grim satisfaction. The helicopter. Minutes later, the whir of helicopter blades thundered overhead. Rescuers secured us onto stretchers, lifting us carefully. Pain tore through every nerve in my body, but I stayed quiet, playing the part of the broken victim. As they hoisted us upward, I caught a glimpse of Vanessa's face. Her eyes widened when she saw my chest rise faintly with breath. For the first time in years, I saw fear in her, not of losing me, but of losing control. The helicopter lifted off, carrying us away from her lies. The hospital. Fluorescent lights. The sharp smell of antiseptic. Voices overlapping in urgent tones. We were wheeled through double doors into the emergency ward. Doctors and nurses swarmed us, stitching, bandaging, stabilizing. I drifted in and out, my body clinging stubbornly to life. At one point, I heard Eric's voice outside the curtain, "We just want to say goodbye, in case they don't make it." Goodbye. My stomach turned. They stepped in, their presence a dark cloud. Vanessa leaned close to my ear. Her whisper was colder than the mountain wind. "This time, stay down, Mom. Don't make this harder." But she didn't know the nurse was standing right there, adjusting my fore. Her eyes flicked toward me, suspicion dawning. I twitched my finger just once and she saw. Her face hardened with quiet understanding. Hours later, 2 police officers appeared at my bedside. The nurse had told them everything. Detective Harris, a man with tired eyes and a steady voice, leaned close. "You're safe now. We know. Tell us what happened." With every ounce of strength, I rasped, "My daughter and her husband. They pushed us. The evidence." David, bruised and broken but alive, handed over his phone. The detective listened to the recording, Vanessa's cold confession about Thomas, Eric's gloating about the inheritance. Their own words betrayed them. That night, while Vanessa and Eric wept fake tears in the waiting room, the officers closed in. "Vanessa Miller, Eric Walker-Urey under arrest for attempted murder," the detective announced. Eric tried to protest. Vanessa screamed. But the officers were unmoved. Handcuffs clicked. Justice had begun. The trial. Months later, I sat in the courtroom, my arm in a brace, scars still aching. Vanessa sat at the defense table, her once proud face pale and hard. Eric beside her, lips pressed thin. The prosecutor played the recording. Their voices filled the room, arrogant, cruel, undeniable. Jurors shifted uncomfortably. Reporters scribbled furiously. When it was my turn to testify, I looked directly at my daughter. "You pushed your brother 20 years ago," I said, my voice trembling but strong. "You pushed your father and me off that cliff. But you didn't win. The truth is stronger than your lies." For the first time, she looked away. The verdict was swift. Guilty of attempted murder. Guilty of fraud. Guilty of conspiracy. The judge's gavel struck like thunder, life in prison. Aftermath. It has been a year since that day. David and I still bear the scars, inside and out, but we are alive. More importantly, the truth, Thomas's truth, has finally been spoken aloud. Sometimes at night, when the house is quiet, I sit on the porch and look at the stars. I imagine Thomas up there, finally at peace. And I whisper, "It's over, my son. She can't hurt anyone anymore." David takes my hand, and though the years have carved lines into our faces, there's a strength in his grip that tells me we survived not just the fall, but the betrayal that nearly destroyed us. Vanessa thought silence would bury everything. But in the end, it was silence, our stillness, our feigned death, that unmasked her. And now, her voice, her words, her lies are the chains that bind her forever.